You never really know what's happening inside a place you think you own, not until you step away from the paperwork, the numbers, the contracts, and the shiny reports that managers carefully prepare to impress you, and actually walk through the door as just another ordinary customer. That's exactly what Daniel thought as he pushed open the old glass door of his diner, dressed in faded jeans, a cheap hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. For years, he had been the proud owner of the place, the little restaurant, on the corner that his father once dreamed of running before passing it down to him. But life had pulled him in other directions. Expansion, investors, and new ventures had made him a businessman more than a restaurant owner. Reports told him everything was fine, customers happy, staff doing well, and profits climbing steadily. Yet something inside him whispered that papers could hide things, that smiles in office meetings might mask frustrations in the kitchen, and that real stories could only be seen when no one knew who you were. So here he was, undercover in his own diner, just another customer looking for breakfast, not as the boss, but as a stranger hoping to see what the walls of this place would reveal. He didn't expect anything dramatic, maybe a lazy waiter here, a slightly undercooked egg there, or perhaps the surprise of good service that made him proud. But what Daniel stumbled upon in that moment, what he saw when he shifted his eyes toward the corner of the diner, was something that shook him far deeper than he could have ever imagined. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a young waitress, weaving between tables, balancing trays of steaming plates and half-empty coffee cups, the smell of bacon and toast clinging to her apron. She wore the same standard uniform as the others, the simple shirt and black slacks that gave the diner its clean, no-nonsense look. But Daniel's sharp eyes, trained through years of noticing small details in business, caught something different. The girl's right hand wasn't moving quite right. Her fingers trembled each time she gripped the edge of a tray. Her wrist bent at an odd angle, as though even the act of pouring coffee was a small war. She smiled at customers, forced but kind, though every time she turned away, her face twitched. With pain she thought no one noticed. Daniel leaned back in his booth, narrowing his eyes. Was he imagining it? Maybe she had just sprained her wrist slightly, nothing too serious. But then she stumbled as a customer called for extra syrup, catching herself on the counter with her left hand, while her right dangled uselessly. She quickly composed herself, muttering a soft apology before rushing back to the kitchen. And that's when Daniel's heart sank. Her hand wasn't just sore, it looked broken. Most people would have brushed it off. After all, accidents happen. People come to work with minor injuries, and life doesn't always grant the luxury of rest. But Daniel felt something stir inside him, something more personal than the usual detached observations of a businessman. Why was a young waitress with a clearly injured hand still serving heavy trays, smiling through tears of pain, working in his diner without so much as a proper bandage or support? Why hadn't anyone taken notice? Why hadn't the manager excused her? And most of all, why was she here at all, instead of resting or in a hospital where she clearly needed to be? He felt anger bubble up, but it was tangled with guilt. Because if this was happening right under his roof, then wasn't he, the owner, the one who had ultimately failed her? He shifted uncomfortably in his booth, his fingers curling around the chipped edge of the menu as he tried to steady himself. He had come undercover for curiosity, but now he realized he might uncover something far more painful than a poorly made omelet or a rude cashier. He was about to uncover the hidden cost of survival, written across the face of a girl who refused to give up even when her hand screamed with agony. Daniel took a slow breath, his disguise protecting him from recognition, and decided to observe quietly for now. The waitress, despite her injury, moved with surprising determination. She greeted customers with warmth, remembered orders by heart, and even cracked small jokes that drew laughter from tired truck drivers and young parents juggling restless children. She was efficient, almost too efficient, as though trying to prove she was worth more than her pain. But every few minutes her broken hand betrayed her, shaking, stiffening, or hanging lifeless at her side until she caught herself and forced it back into motion. Daniel noticed how none of the other staff seemed to pay attention. The cooks yelled for orders, the busboys rushed to clear tables, and the manager leaned lazily against the counter, scrolling on his phone. It was as though she had become invisible. Her pain swallowed by the noise of the diner's morning rush, and that realization hit him harder than he expected, because invisibility is the cruelest weight to carry, especially when you're already hurt. He thought of his own daughter for a moment, just a teenager now, but working summers at a bookstore near their home. What if she had broken her hand and kept pushing through shifts, unnoticed by her boss, unprotected by the system? The thought twisted in his chest. This waitress wasn't just a worker. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, maybe even a mother herself. And yet here she was, sacrificing her health for a paycheck. Daniel suddenly knew this was no ordinary visit. He wasn't just going to sit quietly, eat his pancakes, and walk out. Something was wrong here, and he needed to know why. He leaned forward in his booth, his eyes following her every step, waiting for the right moment to speak, or maybe for her struggle to tell him the story words hadn't yet revealed. Daniel stirred the coffee the waitress had placed before him, though he barely tasted it. The steaming mug sat forgotten on the table as his attention remained fixed on her every movement, watching as she brushed a loose strand of hair from her face with her good hand, balancing trays that would have been heavy for anyone, let alone someone with a broken wrist. Her forced smile masked exhaustion so well that casual customers might never notice. But Daniel wasn't a casual customer. He had come to see the truth behind his own business, and now it was staring back at him, raw and undeniable. He tried to steady himself, convincing his racing mind that perhaps she was just clumsy, maybe she had a minor sprain, maybe he was overthinking, but each time he sought excuses, reality tore them down. The faint swelling along her knuckles, the way she winced when she twisted the coffee pot, the quick shake of her wrist when she thought no one was watching, all signs pointed to something worse than a minor bruise. Daniel tapped his finger against the edge of the mug, his pulse quickening with a mix of concern, guilt, and an uneasy sense of responsibility he couldn't shake. The diner buzzed with the normal chaos of mid-morning, the jukebox in the corner spilled out an old country tune, silverware clinked against ceramic plates, and the smell of frying bacon mixed with the faint tang of burnt toast. But beneath the normal sounds was a dissonance, a rhythm out of place, and Daniel realized it. Was the muffled gasp of the waitress each time she carried a load heavier than she could manage. She passed his table with a tray of pancakes and sausages balanced precariously, her face pale but determined. He caught her eye briefly, just long enough to notice the flicker of pain that she instantly replaced with a smile. That brief exchange cut through him sharper than he expected. She didn't know who he was, and to her, he was just another stranger in a hoodie. But Daniel felt the invisible thread of humanity tie them together in that instant. He wasn't just seeing an injured worker, he was seeing a young woman fighting to survive in silence. He thought back to his father's words, ones he hadn't revisited in years. A business isn't built on profit, son. It's built on people. Take care of your people, and the business will take care of itself. Daniel had quoted that line in speeches to investors, plastered it in glossy brochures, even repeated it in interviews when asked about the diner's legacy. But here, right in front of him, that promise had been broken. Not by words, but by inaction. And that's when the guilt struck even deeper. Somewhere along the way, between expansions and balance sheets, he had let distance build between himself and the ground floor of his own dream. Somewhere he had stopped noticing if the people who carried his business were carrying wounds too heavy to bear. And now, watching this girl push herself beyond her limits, he realized the distance wasn't just physical, it was moral. He was her boss, even if she didn't know it, and yet she was suffering in silence while he sat hidden in plain sight. Daniel shifted in his booth, debating whether to reveal himself, to step in and tell her to stop, to demand the manager send her home. But something told him that bursting into the scene as the owner wouldn't give him the full picture. He wanted to know the why behind her broken hand and her broken silence. Why was she here, working when she clearly shouldn't be? Did she have no choice? Was it desperation, fear, or something darker? Mistreatment, neglect, exploitation? His chest tightened at the thought. He needed answers, not just the surface ones, but the kind that told the whole truth. So he chose patience. He would remain, undercover a little longer, listening, watching, piecing together her story through fragments of overheard conversations and unguarded expressions. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. A family with 3 children spilled into the booth across from him, creating the kind of cheerful chaos that only children could. As the waitress approached to take their order, Daniel leaned back, pretending to read the menu but straining to catch every word. She scribbled down their requests, nodding attentively, but when one of the children knocked over a glass of orange juice, the tray she was holding wobbled dangerously. She caught it with her left hand, but her right twitched uncontrollably, nearly giving way. "You okay, miss?" the father asked, genuine concern flickering across his face. She froze for a moment, then forced another smile. "Yes, sir, I'm fine. Just a little clumsy today." Daniel's jaw tightened. That was no clumsiness. That was a practiced lie, one she had probably told 100 times to co-workers, customers, maybe even herself. And the fact that she said it with such ease made him wonder how long she had been hiding this. When she disappeared into the kitchen, Daniel's eyes drifted toward the manager at the counter. The man still scrolled lazily on his phone, oblivious to the struggles unfolding right before him. A pang of anger shot through Daniel's chest. This wasn't just neglect, it was willful blindness. The staff were too busy, the customers too distracted, and the manager too indifferent to see what Daniel could see clearly. That girl was in no condition to work. And yet, she was the one holding the diner together, her broken hand serving more customers with more dedication than anyone else in the room. Daniel rubbed his temples, frustration clawing at him. He wanted to shout, to shake the manager, to tell him to wake up and do his job. But he kept silent. Because this wasn't just about confronting one lazy manager, this was about uncovering the whole truth. The truth began to unravel a little more when he caught snippets of conversation from a table of older women near the window. "That poor girl," one of them whispered, "still working, even with that injury." Another sighed, shaking her head. "I heard she can't afford to take time off. Something about medical bills, maybe her brother too. They say she's the only one keeping things afloat at home." Daniel's ears burned as he leaned in slightly, pretending to adjust his napkin. So it wasn't just a sprain, it was survival. Every plate she carried, every coffee she poured, every smile she forced was a step in a desperate balancing act between pain and poverty. And suddenly, Daniel realized this wasn't just about one waitress. This was about the hidden stories. Behind so many workers who kept businesses alive while struggling silently with battles no one cared to see. He pressed his hands together, his disguise still intact, and whispered to himself, "Not anymore." He didn't yet know how he was going to do it. But Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving this diner until he uncovered every truth about that girl's broken hand, her broken silence, and the broken system that had let her suffer. In his own restaurant. Daniel sat in his booth longer than he intended, his untouched breakfast growing cold while he tried to process everything he had seen so far. The waitress, moving from table to table, was like a storm contained in a fragile glass. Fragile because every step seemed like it could shatter her, yet storm because her determination refused to let her collapse. He couldn't stop staring at her wrist. The awkward way it dangled when she thought no one was watching, the way she winced when she had to twist it just to refill a coffee cup. That wrist wasn't just sprained, It was fractured, or worse, and Daniel knew it. He had seen enough sports injuries on his son's football team to recognize the stiffness and swelling. And yet here she was, hiding the pain behind her apron, trying to convince the world she was fine. But what gnawed at him even more was the question of why. Why would anyone push themselves to this breaking point? Why risk permanent damage to a hand just to show up for a job that barely paid minimum wage? Unless, of course, she didn't have a choice. The diner kept buzzing as the morning rolled on, but Daniel wasn't really hearing it anymore. The clink of forks, the chatter of conversations, the hiss of the grill, everything blurred into background noise. He had tuned himself into one frequency, hers. He noticed little details others missed, like how she took a deep breath before lifting a tray, as though mentally preparing for the shot of pain, or how she leaned slightly on her hip to balance the load so her injured hand carried less weight, or how she sometimes pressed her wrist discreetly against the counter when she passed, maybe trying to numb it against the cold surface. These weren't the habits of someone dealing with a minor inconvenience. These were survival strategies of someone whose injury was a daily torment. And Daniel, with every passing minute, felt the weight of his own failure press heavier on his chest. This was happening under his roof, in his business, in his diner. His brand was built on the promise of family values and taking care of staff, yet here was the living contradiction, right in front of him. He began piecing together the fragments of her life from what he overheard. The older women near the window had hinted at her medical bills, and soon another snippet drifted his way when two truck drivers at the counter mentioned her name casually. "Tough girl, that Emily," one of them said. "Came in even after the accident. Most folks would have stayed home, but not her." Daniel froze, holding on to that word. Accident. It wasn't much, but it was something. An accident. That explained the broken hand, but what kind of accident forced her to keep working instead of healing? His mind raced. Car crash? Workplace slip? Or something worse, something personal that no one dared to say out loud. He tightened his grip on the edge of the table. He needed the truth, and he was willing to wait until it revealed itself, no matter how long it took. Emily. Now she wasn't just a nameless worker. She was a person with a story he hadn't yet uncovered. Daniel mouthed her name silently, tasting the weight of it. He thought again of his daughter and how easily she could have been in Emily's place if life had taken a cruel turn. That thought struck deeper than any financial report or business setback ever could. It wasn't numbers he was dealing with here, it was lives, real lives. And suddenly, Daniel knew this wasn't going to be a casual undercover visit anymore. This was personal. When Emily returned with a pot of coffee, Daniel deliberately engaged her in conversation, testing the waters. "Busy day, huh?" he asked, lightly, trying to sound like nothing more than a bored customer making small talk. Her smile flashed quickly, almost reflexively. "Always busy here," she said, her voice soft but steady. She poured his coffee with her left hand, the injured one barely grazing the pot. Daniel noticed the subtle shake in her fingers but pretended not to. "Do you ever get a break?" he pressed gently, leaning back. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Breaks are a luxury," she said, then quickly added, "But that's okay. I like keeping busy." And just like that, she hurried off before he could ask more. Daniel watched her retreating figure, her limp more pronounced. Now that he was looking closely, that wasn't just a broken wrist. Something else was wrong, something more than she wanted anyone to see. Frustration bubbled in him, but he forced himself to stay calm. If he pushed too hard, too soon, she might shut down completely. He needed patience, subtlety, observation. The truth had a way of slipping through cracks when people thought no one was paying attention. And so he sat, watching her like a hawk while pretending to be just another customer. He watched how she avoided using her right hand unless absolutely necessary. He noticed how she favored one side of her body, as if more than her wrist hurt. He even saw the shadow pass over her face when she glanced at the manager, a flash of something like fear or resentment. That look wasn't just about pain. That was about power, or the lack of it. The minutes stretched on, and Daniel's guilt grew heavier. He realized something else then. It wasn't just Emily who was invisible. It was workers like her everywhere, people hiding their pain, putting on uniforms, smiling through tears, all because they couldn't afford not to. He thought of the slogans he had approved for marketing. Our staff are family. We take care of our own. Empty promises. If this was how family was treated, then what did that say about him as the owner? He clenched his jaw, whispering, to himself so no one could hear, "This ends today." But he knew that to end it, he first had to understand it. And to understand it, he needed Emily to open the door to her truth. As the lunch rush began to pick up, Daniel realized his window of opportunity was narrowing. More customers meant more chaos, and more chaos meant less chance to get close to her. He needed to act soon, but before he could, something happened that forced everything into the open. A tray slipped from Emily's grip as she carried it past his booth. Plates crashed to the floor, silverware scattering across the tiles. The sound drew every eye in the diner. Emily froze, her face flushed with embarrassment, clutching her wrist as though the pain had finally broken through her carefully constructed mask. Daniel's heart lurched. This was it. This was the moment when her secret could no longer be hidden, not from the customers, not from the staff, and certainly not from him. The crash of the tray hitting the floor silenced the diner in an instant. The clattering of plates echoing longer than it should have, as though the sound itself carried the weight of the secret Emily had been trying to keep hidden. Every head turned toward her, customers pausing mid-bite, forks suspended in the air, conversations cut short by the sharp crack of ceramic against tile. For a moment, Emily just stood frozen, her body stiff, her face pale and eyes wide with something far heavier than embarrassment. Her good hand clutched her wrist instinctively, a reflex she couldn't control, and that was the moment Daniel knew, without any lingering doubt, that her hand wasn't just sprained or sore. It was broken, and badly. She bent quickly to clean up the mess, her injured hand dangling helplessly, but her manager's voice cut through the room before she could even touch a shard of glass. "What the hell, Emily?" The manager barked from behind the counter, his phone still in his hand. His voice wasn't concerned, wasn't even annoyed in the way one might expect. It was sharp, cold, laced with irritation that someone had interrupted his laziness. The tone made Daniel's blood boil instantly. Emily flinched like a scolded child, mumbling an apology as she knelt down to pick up the pieces. I'm sorry. It slipped, she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. A few sympathetic customers bent slightly, ready to help. But the manager waved them off with a dismissive gesture. "Don't bother, she'll handle it." The words landed like stones in Daniel's chest. Handle it? With what? A broken hand and the weight of shame crushing her shoulders? Daniel gripped the edge of his booth so hard his knuckles whitened, his jaw tightening as he fought to remain under cover. He watched as Emily tried to sweep the broken shards into a dustpan with her left hand, her right trembling uselessly at her side. A young mother at the next booth leaned over and said softly, "Honey, are you okay? That wrist looks bad." Emily glanced up, her face flushing crimson, then forced a brittle smile. "I'm fine, really, just clumsy," she repeated, the same line Daniel had already heard her use before. It was a script, he realized, a lie she had practiced to keep people from asking too many questions. But now the lie was crumbling in plain sight. When she stood, balancing the dustpan awkwardly, Daniel noticed tears shimmering at the edges of her eyes. Not dramatic, not a sob. Just the quiet kind of tears that people hide when they've run out of strength to keep everything bottled inside. The manager didn't let the moment pass quietly. "Get it together, Emily. You've got tables waiting," he snapped, before turning back to his phone as though nothing had happened. That was the breaking point for Daniel. He had come here undercover to observe, to blend in, to gather the truth silently, but now the fire in his chest threatened to expose him. Every part of him wanted to slam his hands on the table, rip off his disguise, and demand answers right there in front of everyone. But something stopped him. Emily's face. She had already been humiliated enough, her struggle exposed in front of strangers. If Daniel revealed himself as the owner now, the spotlight would burn her even brighter, and he didn't want her to feel like a specimen under glass. No, he needed to find a way to help her without crushing the dignity she was, fighting so hard to hold on to. So instead, he slid quietly out of his booth and approached the counter. The manager barely looked up, assuming Daniel was just another customer with a complaint. "Coffee refill?" the man asked lazily, not even noticing the way Daniel's eyes burned with suppressed fury. Daniel forced a neutral tone. "That. Waitress, Emily. Is she all right?" The manager shrugged, barely paying attention. "She's fine, always making a fuss over nothing. She's tough. Don't worry about her." The casual dismissal, the indifference dripping from every word, made Daniel's stomach twist. He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "Her hand looks broken." This time, the manager snorted. "She says it's fine, so it's fine. Besides, she needs the hours. Girl practically begged me not to cut her shifts after her little accident." He waved the thought away like it was insignificant, then went back to scrolling his phone. Daniel froze. After her accident. The phrase lingered in his mind, begging for more context. Accident? What accident? He wanted to press further, but before he could, Emily reappeared, carrying another tray with that same forced determination. She caught his eye for just a second, and in that fleeting glance, Daniel saw it. Fear. Not of him, not of the customers, but of something larger. Something pressing down on her life like an invisible weight. The kind of fear that made people keep secrets. The kind of fear that made broken bones feel safer than broken truths. Daniel swallowed hard, retreating to his booth with more questions than answers. Over the next half hour, he continued watching. Her closely and slowly, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. One of the older customers, a regular judging by the way she spoke to Emily, asked gently, "How's your brother doing, dear?" Emily's smile flickered, her eyes dimming. "He's hanging in there," she murmured, quickly changing the subject before scurrying away. Daniel's mind lit up with connections. Brother, medical bills, accident. It was all tangled together somehow. She wasn't just working for herself. She was carrying someone else's burden too. The broken hand, the endless shifts, the refusal to stop working. It wasn't just about her survival. It was about someone she loved. Daniel leaned back, his chest tightening. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. Emily wasn't invisible because people didn't care. She was invisible because she had made herself invisible, hiding her pain so she could keep moving forward, sacrificing her own body for the sake of someone else. And now, as he sat in his own diner disguised as a stranger, Daniel felt both awe at her strength and fury at the system that had forced her into this position. He knew he couldn't sit still much longer. The truth was rising, bubbling to the surface, and soon it would spill over. And when it did, Daniel would have to decide whether to keep hiding behind his disguise or finally step into the light and confront the reality his diner had hidden from him. Daniel sat in silence, his food untouched, as his mind wrestled with everything he had just witnessed. Each new piece of the puzzle surrounding Emily gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. She wasn't just a worker pushing through pain for her paycheck. She was a young woman drowning in responsibilities, far greater than most people her age should ever have to face. The mention of her brother had set his thoughts spiraling, and the more he replayed her words, the more he realized this was about more than just an accident. Her broken hand was a symptom of a larger story, one rooted in family obligations, financial struggles, and a system that had left her no safety net. He watched as Emily returned to the table with the family and their children, serving them food with her left hand while her right dangled stiffly at her side. She smiled through the pain, but Daniel saw past the facade. That wasn't the smile of someone who was okay. It was the mask of someone fighting to hold their world together while it quietly crumbled around them. His thoughts drifted back to conversations he'd had with his accountants, the ones who had assured him that his diner was doing well, profits rising, employee turnover low. They had shown him graphs and charts, carefully polished numbers that told the story of a thriving business. But numbers, Daniel realized now, had no heart. They didn't reveal the bruises under a uniform sleeve or the tears wiped away in the bathroom between shifts. Numbers told him everything was fine. Emily's swollen wrist told him otherwise. And the worst part was, he hadn't even known her name until today. This was his diner, his father's legacy, and yet he had become so distant that a stranger in disguise had to remind him that behind every paycheck was a human being with a story that could either rise or fall depending on the way he ran his business. As Emily moved between tables, Daniel caught snippets of conversation again, his ears sharp for anything that might give him more insight. At one booth, two young men whispered about her accident. "You heard about her, right? She slipped on the bus steps last month, broke her wrist." The other shook his head. "Nah, it wasn't that simple. My cousin said she got hurt trying to break up some kind of fight near her apartment. Don't know the full story, but man, tough girl. Still shows up to work every day." Daniel's mind whirled. Which was it? A fall, a fight, or something else entirely? He glanced back at Emily, wondering how many different stories had been spun around her injury. The truth, he suspected, was something she had kept tightly guarded, perhaps even from her co-workers. The breakthrough came when Emily returned to the older women near the window, the same ones Daniel had overheard earlier. One of them reached out and patted her arm gently. "You need to rest that hand, child. Your poor brother wouldn't want you hurting yourself like this." Emily's smile faltered, her eyes briefly clouding over before she whispered, "If I don't work, there won't be medicine for him. He needs me to keep going. I'll be fine." Daniel's chest tightened as the words sank in. It wasn't just about her bills or rent. It was about her brother's survival. Every shift she worked, every plate she carried, every ounce of pain she endured was tied directly to someone she loved who depended on her. Suddenly, the broken hand wasn't the story anymore. It was just the visible scar of a deeper sacrifice. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He imagined his own children in her shoes, forced to choose between their own health and the well-being of a sibling. It was unthinkable. And yet here Emily was, living that reality in his diner. He thought of the marketing phrases again. "Our staff is family." The words mocked him now. If Emily was family, why was she left to carry this burden alone? Why had no one stepped in to help her, to offer medical leave, to cover her shifts, to find some way to ease the crushing load she bore? The answer was as clear as it was painful, because no one had cared enough to notice. And that made him furious. Not just at the manager, not just at the staff, but at himself. The anger simmered inside him as he continued to watch. He saw how Emily moved slower now, fatigue settling into her bones, her steps dragging slightly. He noticed how her smile cracked more often, how she glanced nervously at the manager as if afraid of disappointing him again. Daniel wanted to stand up, walk across the room and tell her right there and then that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to break herself to keep her brother alive, that the owner of this diner would make sure she was taken care of. But he hesitated, torn, between the role of undercover observer and the role of responsible owner. Revealing himself too soon could scare her, overwhelm her, maybe even make her feel exposed in front of the entire diner. No, he thought. The timing had to be right. He had to earn her trust first, had to show her that someone was actually listening. He scribbled notes on a napkin while pretending to doodle idly. It wasn't the kind of notes his accountants or lawyers would ever see. No figures, no percentages, no strategies. Just raw observations. Emily, broken wrist, brother, medicine, fear of manager, overworking, refuses to rest. As he wrote the words, his guilt turned into resolve. This wasn't just about fixing a problem in his business. This was about fixing the broken promises he had made to himself, his father, and to every worker who had trusted his name on their paycheck. And then, just when Daniel thought he had pieced together enough of Emily's story to confront her later, another detail emerged. One that left him stunned. Emily approached a quiet table near the back, where a thin boy of about 12 sat alone, his face pale and tired. She set down a small plate in front of him, a grilled cheese sandwich and a cup of soup. "Eat slowly, okay? I'll be back to check on you," she said softly, her voice carrying a tenderness Daniel hadn't heard in any of her customer interactions. The boy nodded weakly, picking at the sandwich. Daniel's eyes widened as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. That wasn't just a random customer. That was her brother. She had brought him here to the diner because she couldn't leave him alone at home. And suddenly, the entire picture came into focus. The broken hand, the endless shifts, the desperate smiles. Everything she was doing, every ounce of pain she endured, was for him. Daniel sat back, his heart pounding, struggling to catch his breath. The truth was bigger than he imagined. Emily wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for someone else's life. And now, sitting just a few tables away, the fragile boy who depended on her was living proof of the sacrifice she was making. Daniel knew in that moment that nothing about his diner, his business, or even his life would ever look the same again. The next morning, Daniel made his way back to the diner earlier than usual, dressed once again in his undercover clothes. He wanted to see if Lily would show up despite her injury. As the door jingled, he noticed her already inside, slowly wiping down tables with her good hand. She winced occasionally, but kept pushing through. That moment hit him hard because he knew most employees would have easily taken the excuse to stay home. But she wasn't just working. She was carrying herself like the place depended on her. He observed quietly, catching how she greeted every customer with warmth, never letting her pain show in her tone. That was when Daniel decided he couldn't stay hidden any longer. When the last customer left, he approached her directly and introduced himself as the real owner. Lily froze, disbelief flickering across her face, her good hand holding the rag still in midair. He explained how he had been visiting Undercover to understand the diner better and admitted that her dedication had stunned him. Lily, flustered, immediately apologized for not being able to perform at her best with her injury, but Daniel interrupted, telling her she had already gone beyond what anyone could expect. He then asked her why she hadn't told anyone about her situation. Lily hesitated, then revealed that she couldn't afford time off because she was the sole caretaker for her younger brother after their parents passed away, and every paycheck mattered. Her honesty, mixed with the vulnerability in her voice, left Daniel deeply moved. At that moment, he realized the diner didn't just need workers, it needed people like her who treated the place like family. He promised her support and assured her she wouldn't have to bear the weight alone anymore, and Lily, though still in shock, felt a wave of relief as her eyes welled up with tears she had held back for too long. The final reveal came with a weight that neither the waitress nor the undercover owner could have anticipated. The day he finally took off the disguise and admitted who he was, the diner felt as if it had been hit by a thunderbolt. The stunned silence among the staff lingered like a heavy pause before applause, while the waitress's eyes widened in disbelief, her lips parting, but no words forming. She had known him only as a quiet, slightly clumsy coworker, someone who had shared her frustrations, who had quietly helped when her hand throbbed too much to carry trays, and who had listened when she vented about her struggles outside of work. Never once had she suspected he was the very man who owned the building, the one who held the power to change not only her life, but the lives of everyone working under that roof. As he explained why he had chosen to go undercover, the emotions that rushed across her face were impossible to mask. Confusion, then shock, then gratitude so intense it welled in her eyes. The other staff members looked on, a mixture of nerves and excitement sparking in their expressions, because suddenly the hierarchy had crumbled. The owner wasn't an untouchable figure behind a desk anymore. He was real, he was human, and he had seen the truth of their lives with his own eyes. He didn't speak with arrogance, but with sincerity, confessing that he had discovered not just hard work and resilience, but also cracks in the system he himself had unknowingly allowed. He admitted his failure in not being present before, in not knowing the names and stories of those who had carried his vision on their shoulders. For the waitress, hearing that acknowledgement felt like justice long overdue, like someone had finally recognized the pain and sacrifice that had gone unseen for too long. And then came the part that left everyone breathless. He announced, sweeping, changes, real reforms that would reshape how the diner operated. Better pay, proper medical support, staff schedules that allowed for balance, and above all, a promise that no one would ever again feel abandoned by the very place they devoted their labor to. The waitress, standing there with her bandaged hand, trembling slightly, realized that the moment she had been struggling toward wasn't about pity or rescue. It was about validation, about someone finally proving her worth was seen and valued. The applause that erupted from her co-workers wasn't just for the owner's words, but for her, for the courage she had shown in continuing to work through pain, for the kindness she had shown even when exhausted, and for the example she unknowingly set that had stirred an owner to transform not just his diner but himself. And in that eruption of clapping and teary smiles, something shifted permanently. The diner was no longer just a workplace, but a community where resilience had been recognized and humanity restored. The waitress, though still stunned, felt the impossible weight she had been carrying ease at last, and the owner, humbled and changed, understood that in her struggle he had found not just an employee, but the very heart of his diner.